A cold wind was blowing, tossing our tent violently in its gale, and sending freezing slivers of air into our skin. My wife and I were huddled together for warmth, shivering and chattering our teeth. The blankets were never thick enough anymore, and each night seemed to grow colder than the one before. My stomach rumbled with hunger again, and I felt a stab of pain in my gut at the same time, my body revolting against the spoiled meat and rotten vegetation I'd been forced to eat the day prior. Food was scarce this time of year, and we'd been desperate that day. Ever since fire became a thing of our past, we'd all been struggling to survive, struggling to stay warm. Those of us who were left, anyways. The camp where we lived was home to nearly 50 people, and every winter we lost more. As much as we may have wanted to, no one dared to have children, since we were all terrified of their noisy cries attracting the things which came in the night, the hungry creatures that came with the darkness. When humanity lost the ability to make fire, there were other changes too. It was like a celestial shift had happened. We had moved into a new era, one in which man was no longer in charge. Instead, ancient things which we had no name for emerged from the depths of the deepest and darkest caves, and began to quickly take over, to devour the weak and the helpless. People disappeared into the night, never to be seen again, and we all knew the monsters had taken them. And yet none of us have been able to capture or kill a single one of them. They are elusive as ghosts, quick as vipers. It wasn't only fire that went away when the Great Change happened. We might have been able to maintain civilization if that were the case. But we didn't just lose the ability to make a flame. Everything that cast a light or made a spark ceased to function. All electronics, every computer on the planet went out at once, like someone had put their finger on a giant light switch and pushed it down, plunging the entire world into permanent darkness, and back into the technological dark ages. We all thought that early man was simple, stupid, for not understanding how to make fire. But none of us considered the possibility that fire was not something earned, but something given. Fire was a gift from the gods, and we angered the hell out of them. We ravaged nature. We killed off most species of animals. We turned the oceans into cesspools of plastic and oil. And we destroyed this once great planet we've been given. So, the gods decided to take back the sacred gift they had granted us so long ago, as punishment for how we had used it. They took away the spark and the fire that we had harnessed for our own purposes, and they left us cold and in darkness once again. Just like we had been once before. So long ago. "Honey, are you awake?" I asked my wife in a soft voice. "Yeah," she answered back immediately. "I can't sleep. It's too quiet." That was the other strange thing about the world now. Without cars, traffic, and electricity, it was always quiet. It was silent everywhere all the time. The only noise was the sound of your own breathing. It was rare to encounter animals anymore. They were so skittish and terrified since the change had happened. And who could blame them? We called them shadows, the creatures that came from the darkness, because that was what they looked like. If you saw a dark outline of something moving towards you, by then it was already too late. You were already dead. They were impossibly quiet, insatiable in their hunger. As I was thinking about the creatures, I heard something from just outside. The sound of breathing and movement. Gooseflesh rose across my skin and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. My wife grabbed my hand and gripped it tightly in hers. The two of us held our collective breath and waited to be disemboweled. If it happened, it would all be over in an instant. Another rustling sound of movement, and then heavy breathing. Whoever it was, they were very close. I'm telling you, that's what he said. Fire, though? Fire doesn't exist anymore. I sighed with relief, and my wife did the same, releasing her vice-like grip on my hand. People were talking outside our tent, and the two of us sat bolt upright, hearing the excited chatter back and forth. At least we weren't going to die. That was always a relief. How can he be sure? He's never even seen it before. He's just a kid. I know, but he sounded positive. I'm going to go tell Bartholomew. We'll see what he says. My wife Sarah and I got up and went outside, eager to see what was going on. Lisa and Francis were heading towards the larger tent belonging to the camp's leader, Bartholomew. What the hell's going on? I asked Lisa. The two looked back and forth at each other nervously. Steven said he found something while he was out exploring. He said there's a laboratory just outside the city, about 8 miles from here. He told me... He stopped talking and looked uncertain now. What? What did he find? Fire, he said. Steven told me he found fire. Impossible, my wife whispered, her eyes wide. A tear rolled down one cheek. That's impossible. I doubt very much that what your boy says is true, Bartholomew said piously. We were inside the elder's large round tent. The perimeter of the interior was encircled with a ring of furniture, and at the center was a large chair, almost a throne, but not quite. Nearby, on a small sofa, sat Bartholomew's 3 wives, looking on passively and listening to the conversation. They rarely spoke, especially in public. Why would he lie? Lisa asked. He wouldn't make up something like that. He knows how important it is. How did he describe it exactly? The boy has never even seen fire. It was gone long before he was born. He described it exactly. Warm, orange and red with spiked tips. He said it shimmered and heated his hands when he held them close. Bartholomew looked unconvinced. He put his chin in his hand contemplatively and sighed. I will not risk a search party based on a story from some child. Our best people have worked to make fire for years. I doubt very much that a small boy managed to find it in one afternoon of hiking. What exactly was he doing 8 miles away from camp? He should know better than to be venturing that far on his own. He was trying to help. He likes to explore, and the shadows don't come out during the day. He can run fast, and he always gets back before dark. Until one day he doesn't. What if there's heavy snow? Or if he trips, sprains his ankle? You should know better than to let the boy go so far alone. And I will not permit him to do so again. That isn't up to you. I'm his mother. And I am the leader of this camp. I'll hear no more of this tonight. We will discuss it further after the sun rises. The shadows are never far off. We cannot risk a discussion like this now. That seemed to settle the argument. Everyone nodded and filed out of the tent quickly, going back to their assigned sleeping quarters. Except for Lisa, who followed Sarah and I back to our own enclosure. We let her inside, and a little while later, Francis came with their son, Stephen, the boy who had claimed he had found fire. Within a minute of their arrival, they were telling us what they needed to do. Bartholomew will never allow it. That's why we need you to go. You're the only one who can keep up with him. I've tried. The boy's too fast. I have a bad knee. I'd never make it back by sunset. I had once been a runner, but that was a long time ago. I tried to explain that to them. I was badly out of shape. Oh, come on, said Francis. I've seen you out there. Remember when we got lost that one time and the creatures were after us? You saved us all by carrying Stephen on your shoulders when he was younger. You're just being modest. That was a long time ago, I said. But I was already convinced. I would go with the boy to see what he had found. Still, I was terrified. I didn't want to go for the same reasons Bartholomew had mentioned. Even if he was being overly cautious, he was right. We could encounter a snowstorm or wolves, or one of us could get injured or worse. There were 1,000 ways to die out there these days, not the least of which was a run-in with another group of people. They could be the most dangerous of all. You never knew what to expect when you encountered another group. It must have shown in my eyes because Sarah grabbed my hand and gripped it tightly. You don't have to go if you don't want to. What she didn't say, but didn't need to, was that she wanted me to go. Winter was knocking at the front gate, and pretty soon it wouldn't wait another minute to be let inside. And I could already tell it was going to be a cold one. How far did he say it was? Remember Highway 5? She asked. It took me a few moments, but eventually I remembered and nodded. The name, the road, felt like it was from another lifetime. And I supposed it was. Just past that, down the road, to the right. About 8 miles each way. That was no short run. But if the weather stayed clear and we didn't get any snow, it wouldn't be a problem. The two of us would have to set out at first light, though. And we would need to keep a steady pace. Alright, but try to break the news to Bartholomew gently. I don't want this to look like we're trying to ignore his instructions. Except we are. Yeah, but try not to make it sound like that. I set off with Stephen right after the sun came up, and the two of us began to jog immediately. The boy was 10 years old, but he could sprint like an Olympic runner. Pretty soon I was having trouble keeping up with him. Hey, slow down, I called after him, wheezing. We need to conserve our energy. I'm fine, he yelled back. Take your time. You can catch up with me. Before long, he was far off ahead of me, and I had a stitch growing in my side that felt like a knife blade digging between my ribs. I was out of shape. I sat down on the road and tried to catch my breath and looked to see Stephen was long gone. The blue skies had turned gray, and I looked up to see flurries drifting down from above. The first snowfall of the season, and it had chosen today of all days to arrive. Standing up from where I was sitting at the side of the road, I began to jog again. I just hoped that Stephen would have known better than to leave the road, and would keep going in a straight line until I caught up with him. After a half hour of jogging at a steady pace, I saw him. He was sitting on the hood of an abandoned car which had been left at the side of the road. The gasoline-powered vehicles had stopped working at the same time as everything else. I remembered at the time everyone thought it was a large-scale EMP from a foreign military, meant to cast the Western world back into the Dark Ages. But then the connection was made with the lack of fire, and everyone understood. It was something far worse than an EMP. And it affected everyone, not just us. The whole planet had gone dark all at once. I thought you were a runner, Stephen said, looking impatient. He jumped up from the car hood and looked ready to start going again. We should go back, I said, panting. It's snowing. We can't risk it if it really starts to come down. Oh, come on. It never really starts to pile up the first snowfall of the year. It's all going to be melted by noon. Let's keep going. What if the fire stops working? There might only be so much of it. He had a point there. If a lightning strike or a chemical fire had caused this freak event to occur, it would be short-lived. We would be lucky to find a few embers still smoking. Suddenly I felt hopeful again. I could imagine a fire and the glowing warmth it would give off, and I smiled. Okay, but if it turns into a blizzard, we're going back right away. Just hang on, let me rest for a minute. After a few minutes, I stood up again and started to move at a slow jog. Stephen matched my pace, but then quickly began to run, loping up ahead of me and disappearing over a hill, leaving me behind. By noon, the two of us reached the lab. We went inside, and I looked over my shoulder to see the snow was beginning to accumulate on the grass, although the roads were still clear. Hopefully they would stay that way. Okay, show me where you saw the fire. I told Stephen. He was eager to show me his discovery. My stomach had butterflies in it, and I realized I was actually hopeful. My ears listened closely for the sound of a Bunsen burner left on or the soft hiss of some gas-powered flame. I sniffed the air for the burnt smell of charcoal and smoke, which had been absent for so many years. I could imagine the warmth of it. Last felt so long ago. I imagined food being cooked, meat that was charred and delicious, instead of raw, rancid, and spoiled. "In here," Stephen yelled over his shoulder, leading me deeper into the lab. It was dark in here, and the chances of running into the shadow creatures was much more likely in a place like this. They would sometimes hide out in darkened buildings to get away from the sun during the day. "Stay close," I called to Stephen. "I told your mom I'd keep an eye on you, remember?" "Come on," he yelled back to me. "It's right in here." I followed him into a large laboratory with beakers and tabletop centrifuges, various instruments and jugs of chemicals. Everything was sterile and white, as if this place had been abandoned during a regular workday and no one had ever returned. My stomach felt like there was a cinder block inside, as Stephen led me to a tall metal tank that looked like an oversized oxygen cylinder, and pointed at it excitedly. "Look," he shouted, pointing at it. "Fire! See? I told you!" I stood staring in wide-eyed dismay at the gas tank. On the side of it was the old symbol we had all used so many years ago. The symbol for flammable. An orange-red flame with pointed tips painted on the canister. "What?" Stephen asked. "It's fire, isn't it? Feel it, it's warm." The sun was shining through a nearby window, the heat from the beam of light landing on the side of the gas chemical tank. I wasn't sure what was inside of it exactly, but I noticed there was a slight shimmer above it, like above the asphalt of a road on a very hot day. Maybe it was leaking something. Maybe the combination of air with the chemical inside was causing a reaction that produced heat. I stood up and walked over to the tank, touching the side of it and feeling that it was quite warm. Perhaps just heated by the sun through the window at my back, or perhaps by something else. It was difficult to tell. Letting out a sigh, I turned to look at Stephen, and tried to think of how to explain this to a child without letting him down too badly. I could tell that he had been excited. He had wanted this to be real. He had wanted to be a hero for the camp, and now he would feel like a fool. I didn't want that for him. "You did well, Stephen. This is a gas tank. They used to use these to store oxygen and propane, which you could make fire with. I'm not sure what's inside, but it feels warm to the touch, and that's great. It might help us through the winter somehow if we can use it to our advantage, but this isn't fire. I'm sorry. What you see right here is the symbol for fire. Maybe somebody drew it for you once, and that's why you recognized it. This symbol meant that whatever was in this tank could be set ablaze. It was a warning, so people didn't get injured. Does that make sense?" I could see the distrust in his eyes, a sign of how much hope he'd had in this endeavor. "Are you sure? My mom said that's what fire looks like. She drew a picture that looked just like that." "I'm sure she did. But I saw real fire many times back in the old days, and this isn't it. If your mom were here right now, she would tell you the same thing. Trust me." He lowered his head and looked at the ground. Turning around, he began to shuffle back towards the exit. "Come on, let's go. I don't want to be here 1 minute longer," he said, sounding upset. "Hang on," I called after him. "I'm going to bring this with us. It could help keep us warm through the winter. If there's more of this stuff, it could really help us out. We might even be able to use it to cook food if our science people can get it hot enough. Maybe they can even use it to make fire again." "You really think so?" he asked, running over to help. "Yeah, I do. Come on, help me lift this up. It's heavy, be careful." Stephen and I left the laboratory to find the road covered in a fine layer of white powder. More snow was drifting down from above now, creating a haze which was difficult to see through. And it was colder outside than it had been all year. I cinched my coat tighter around my neck, and pulled my gloves out from my pocket, putting them on. The warmth of the gas tank was already beginning to dissipate, and I felt my hopes fading with it. But I tried not to let that show to Stephen, who had a half-hopeful smile on his face. "Whoa, it's really coming down," he said, looking around in wonderment. "How much longer do you think we have till sunset?" "A few hours at least. But it'll come on fast with these clouds. Let's start jogging. You go ahead if you want. You don't have to wait for me. This tank's going to slow me down some." What I didn't say to him was that I was going to ditch the tank at the first opportunity if I was worried about making it back before sunset. I wasn't going to risk my life on the off chance that it would amount to something. And we could always go back for it the following day. Stephen didn't want to leave me, though. He kept up with my slow jogging pace for a couple hours until I stopped to rest. The sun was getting close to the horizon by that point, and I was a little worried about our progress. It was much slower going with the snow piling up on the road. Both of us had fallen on several occasions, and potholes and ruts were now obscured by the fine white powder, making running much scarier than before. I had already turned my ankle once and was limping slightly. I could feel my shoe getting tighter around my swelling foot and ankle. "You okay?" Stephen asked nervously. "I can carry the tank for a while." I shook my head. It wasn't that I couldn't use the help. The problem was that the tank was totally cold now. I was sure now that the warmth we'd both felt was just the heat from the sun through the window glass, causing the tank to grow hot throughout the day in the lab. Now that we'd been outside in the snow for a while, it was freezing cold, even through my gloves. "I'll be alright," I said. "You start running ahead. That's an order, not a request. I want you to go back and tell everyone what we found. But I don't want you stranded out here with me if I have to hide somewhere for the night." I stood up and started walking again, my hurt ankle feeling twice as bad as before, now that I'd given it a chance to rest. Each step made me wince with agony. Stephen didn't argue, at least. He knew that if I was ordering him to do something, it was serious. He nodded with a grave look on his face and took off down the road, running quickly and disappearing into the snowy mist in the distance. With Stephen gone, I set the gas tank down in a ditch at the side of the road and covered it superficially with snow. There was still a chance it would be useful in some way, so I figured I would come back for it the following day. But I wasn't going to risk carrying it any longer. I began to jog, then picked up my pace and began to run. Every time my left foot hit the pavement, a lightning bolt of pain shot up my leg, but I ignored it as best as I could. Looking up, I could no longer see the position of the sun. The cloud cover overhead was so thick that it felt like it was getting dark already, despite the fact that it was still mid-afternoon. I couldn't help but wonder if the shadow things would come out early if it stayed dark like this. The clouds overhead were dumping snow down on me in heavy globs, which soaked through my coat and my gloves, freezing my hands. Before long, the snow was up to my shins. My legs were exhausted from running and felt like jello. My ankle was throbbing, a swollen ball of pain screaming at me to stop. And finally I did. By that point, I had no idea what time it was anymore. All I knew was that I would not make it back before dusk. I had to find a place to camp out for the night. And it would be a very cold, very terrifying night if I even managed to find such a place. Looking around, I saw an old gas station down the road. It was my best bet, I thought, if I could make it there. Ignoring my exhaustion and the horrible agony of my ankle, I picked myself up and started running again. About 30 paces in, I stepped on the edge of a pothole and turned my ankle badly once again. I felt something tear and a horrible pain rip through the side of my foot and halfway up my lower leg. This time I couldn't walk on it. I had to hop and hobble along on one leg, struggling desperately to find the remaining distance to the gas station before darkness fell completely. When I got there, I could already hear the sounds of the shadow creatures moving nearby, sniffing the air as if searching for me. The darkness was total by that point. The night had settled insidiously over the world without my notice. At some point it was day, and then it was night. I closed the door of the gas station shut behind me, terrified of the complete lack of protection it offered. The top half of the glass had been shattered, making the process of locking it a pointless effort. Nonetheless, I did so, turning the lock and wincing at the loud sound of it snapping shut. Sitting behind the counter where the cash register had once sat, I waited for the creatures outside to hopefully pass by. But I knew there was a good chance they had seen me or heard me, because they were known for their keen senses. Not even a minute had passed before I heard them outside, only a few feet away. Their feet crunched across the same shattered glass I had walked on moments prior. A sound of sniffing could be heard, and husky breathing. I was frozen in place, too terrified to move, and then a deep, guttural voice began to whisper. No one had ever heard the creatures speak before, to my knowledge, but these ones were talking back and forth between each other in low, rumbling voices. I held my breath, waiting in the darkness, shivering and praying they would go past. But then a moment later they were inside. Pitch black shadow shapes grabbed me roughly and pulled me up from the ground. They covered my mouth with something wet and sticky like slime, so I was unable to speak, and began to carry me away from the gas station. I tried to make out the details of these creatures in the low light of the moon, but could see very little. I caught glimpses of rough, wiry fur, dark and thick. Their eyes reflected golden in the night, and their teeth were sharp and pointed, meant for ripping flesh from bone. No matter how hard I tried to scream, nothing made it through the gunk which they had used to cover my mouth, like tarry mud. It seeped into my mouth every time I opened it, and I reminded myself to keep it shut. My heart was hammering with fear as their cold, slimy hands clasped my arms, carrying me away against my will. I was thrashing and kicking, but they held firm and continued dragging me away from the gas station, through the trees and into the woods. Eventually, I had no choice but to accept my fate. Whatever these things were, they were going to kill me and consume me. Maybe not in that order. The creatures brought me to a cave. Taking me inside with them, they brought me down deeper and deeper into tunnels which were winding and narrow, and sometimes through caverns as large as football stadiums. But every movement they made seemed planned and orchestrated, as if they were following a set route. Deeper down into the darkness we went, and I barely caught a glimpse of my captors as they muttered back and forth in an unknown language, low and rumbling like gravel being poured. After a long, long time, I actually slept. I couldn't help it. We'd been traveling for so long, what felt like hours, and the adrenaline rush had passed, and with it I'd been overcome with a need for sleep so deep I could not deny it. When I awoke, I felt like a full night had passed, and my nightmares were quickly forgotten as I jumped to my feet and looked around. I was not in a cage or chained to a wall. Instead, the creatures had left me free to wander around when I woke up. The things were all around me, looking at me as if curious what I would do. They stood on two legs and watched me with intelligent, passive eyes. Despite carrying me here against my will, they looked peaceful now. I took in the place around me and found to my surprise that it was warm down here, and there was light coming from somewhere. It was shimmering a dull green glow, and I tried to figure out where it was coming from, but couldn't. "It appears to be a geothermal heat source," a voice said from behind me. I jumped with fright and backed away, turning around to see a man was behind me, his hands held up in a peaceful gesture. There were other people too, I saw. Dozens of them were down here, living with the creatures. "We've been trying to figure out how it works, and if we can bring it to the surface." The man came a bit closer, but kept a respectful distance, and for that I was grateful. "What are they?" I asked nervously. "We can't communicate with them much yet, but we do know a little bit more than we did at first. We believe they are a branch of human evolution which went underground following a meteor event and subsequent ice age. They chose not to return to the surface, and instead they stayed in the deepest caves and in the darkness, waiting for the world to freeze over again, which it has now, in a way." I remember then seeing a map once, which showed the cave systems of the USA overlaid with all the missing persons cases. The two overlapped perfectly, indicating that wherever these cave systems existed, many people went missing. Just like I was missing now. Were these cave people responsible all along? What do they want from us? Why'd they bring me here? He looked around nervously, then came a bit closer before speaking under his breath. They think they're helping us by bringing us down here. When people escape, it angers them. As if they were giving up a sacred gift they've given us. I guess in a way it is a gift, I said, considering this. It's warm down here. It's safe. There's light and heat. Do they have food? Maybe they'll let me bring my wife down here. Don't get too excited. Personally, I want out. You might want to see what they're offering up for dinner before you commit to staying. And if you want to go with me, I'm leaving at first light. I've got the path all mapped out. I shook the man's hand right then and there. Deal, I said. And thank you. My name's Jordan. What's yours? David, he said. Come on. I think they're about to serve our evening meal. You might not be too hungry when you see it, though. A cold stone slab had been set up as a table in the underground cavern, and the kidnapped people and humanoid creatures assembled around it, most standing up while a few sat down on rocks. And then 2 large sacks were brought into the room, and their contents were emptied out on the stone slab. There were a few dead bats and mice, rats and other critters, but mostly it was an assortment of bugs. Millipedes and worms, spiders and potato bugs, beetles and roaches, still living, squirming, crawling, and trying to escape. The humanoid creatures began to devour everything, first going for the bats and stripping their bodies of their hairy flesh, then going on to the rats and mice next. The hot smell of blood rose up into the air, the sewage stink of entrails following after it. One of the creatures saw me looking stunned and mistook the expression on my face for hunger. Grabbing a handful of intestines, it held it out to me. I took it, slightly worried what it would do if I refused. I snuck away from the stone slab and found David. He wasn't eating either, I noticed. He couldn't stomach the menu in this place, I guessed. Let me know when you leave, I said. I'm going with you. The 2 of us left the cavern after everyone else had gone to sleep. Following a twisting series of tunnels, we ascended up and up, walking for nearly a full day. But finally we reached the surface. I breathed in a deep intake of air, and was glad to be outside again despite the cold. The sun was low in the sky, and I guessed it was getting dark soon. Thank you, I said, waving as we went our separate ways. I hope our paths cross again, David. I really do. But I gotta run, literally. Hold up, he called after me. I don't usually do this. You don't know who you can trust these days. But did you want to come back to my camp with me for dinner tonight? It's close, and who knows, maybe we can set up a trade deal or something between our group and yours. I hesitated. But the more I considered it, the more I decided I should go with him. If I didn't go now, that would ruin any chances of a partnership. And we needed all the help we could get. Okay, I said. Lead the way. But I need to get home before dark. Is your camp far from here? Not far at all, just a half-mile north. Come on, we can be there before dusk if we run. The 2 of us found the road where I had first been captured, and I saw the gas station a little ways away. Then I was startled to see a figure in the road. Even from a distance, I could tell who it was. It was Sarah, my wife. And she looked hurt. I ran towards her, and when I got closer, I saw her clothing was torn and she was covered in gashes and claw marks, her face black and blue with bruises. What happened? I yelled, taking her in my arms. It was the creatures. They attacked our camp. Bartholomew, Francis, Stephen. Everyone's dead. They killed everyone. What? How? This made no sense to me. I thought I'd just seen the truth about the creatures. They weren't evil. It was actually just a group of underground cave people trying to help people in their own strange way. I tried to tell Sarah that, but David interjected. No. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you should know the creatures are very real. You just got lucky the other night that those cave people found you first. Otherwise, you definitely would have died out there. Those creatures are out of control. They're practically invisible, but they're everywhere. Huge, 8-legged monsters that can blend in with the shadows and crawl up behind you silently in an instant. The sun was almost setting now. It was getting very dim outside. We need to go, I said. This is David. He said we could go with him to his camp. I think we should go. The cave people are another option, but personally, I say we go with him. Sarah looked shell-shocked and completely broken from everything that had happened. She simply shook her head. You decide. I'll go wherever you think is best. I decided to go with David. A decision that I would soon come to regret. He brought us to an old, abandoned shopping mall. Immediately, that made me feel nervous, since most people avoided buildings like that. They were too big to control. Too open and unguardable. This is where you guys are living? I asked dubiously. Just temporarily, he said. It's not ideal, I know, but we found a good spot in the basement that we can easily guard. Only one way in and out. We followed him inside, and I looked over to see my wife eyeing the surroundings nervously. I gripped her hand tightly and proceeded forward on wobbly legs, following after the man. He looked back occasionally to see if we were still following, giving a slightly creepy smile, which grew wider each time. Finally, we reached the stairs to the basement, and he led us down into the darkness. I saw there were no lights on down there, and my heart immediately began to jackhammer with fear. I remembered the stories I had heard of people who lived symbiotically with the shadow creatures, luring people to their nests in order to feed them in exchange for safety. It's not much further, David said, and I saw something glowing in his pocket. Reaching down to grab it, I pickpocketed the man who was luring us to our deaths, and grabbed the hunk of rock he had stolen from the caves. Amazingly, it was warm to the touch, and it glowed a soft, pale green color, just like the ones in the underground caverns. It was a little piece of that place, which this man had stolen and brought to the surface for himself. But now it was mine. That was the price he'd have to pay for trying to kill us. I kicked him down the remaining stairs, as I saw shadowy spider legs beginning to emerge from the darkness. I grabbed my wife's hand, yelling at her to run. No! David screamed, tumbling down to the bottom of the stairs, his right leg broken and bent at an unnatural angle. Blood poured out from his mouth and one ear. You can't leave me here with them! They can smell blood! The shadow creatures were on him a second later, devouring him as he screamed. I risked one quick glance over my shoulder to see if they were following us, and wished that I hadn't. Sarah and I made it out of that mall, and we marked the doors with an X to show it was a nest for those creatures. We ran to find the nearest shelter and hid, and we survived that night against all odds. The little chunk of glowing rock which I stole from David, whatever it is, carries with it a sense of hope. It's warm, and it lights up our new home in the darkest hours of night, even when we're at our lowest. We lost our old family. Everyone from our camp is gone. Everyone we knew is dead. But we're starting a new tribe. Sarah is just beginning to show, and I wonder if it'll be a boy or a girl. Either way, I'll be happy. Maybe being alive isn't so bad after all. Maybe we can survive in a world without fire. Thank you for watching tonight's video, listening to tonight's story. Hope you enjoyed. This story was previously featured on the Dr. Nosleep podcast. I'll include a link in the description below if you want to check out his podcast and YouTube channel. This story is also featured in my new book, which is just being released. It's actually available on Amazon now, and it's titled From the Darkness. There'll be a link in the description below if you want to check out the book. And this is a collection of short horror stories, all written by me. There's a bunch of stories in here that have been on podcasts, and one story that's never been seen anywhere else before. So if you enjoy my writing and you want to support my work and purchase a copy of my book, hope you'll check out the description below, or check out Amazon for the book From the Darkness by Jordan Grupe. Thanks everybody for listening. Today's video was supported by patrons like Mark from Earth, Crimson Muse, Joy Burton, Diane Showers, Mark Swall, Cheryl James, Pick Your Sticker, Teddy Dog, Clue 404, Mama Cotto, Dante Kincaid, Zarin Ray, Angela Donovan, Blarian 50, Devin Kyle, Timothy Baird, Ajeti, Bert Turner, Bajani Aspinall, Michael Pierce, Big Joe, Carrie Harkonnen, LaDonna Spivey, Scott Tanaka, Tom Stewart, Sherman Davis, Bryce Shelton, Susan McClendon, Elise Batiste, Lisa and the Cult Jam, Open Circuit, Fabulavore, Raymond Jaggers, That Darn Fox, Raison Detra, Kai Gaming 99, Wendy Burns, The Wendigo, Michael Squishy Park, The Gemstar, Vault 77 Citizen, Puppy Dan, Clovis Wolf, Eldridge Elm, Derek Prey, Elder Being, KC Hawaii, Rob T, Tragic Mermaid, Darren Fishnaller, Cloves Anoya Harris, Roe Underwood, Florida Man Luke, Bethany's Mom, Winter's Kiss, Sam Brook, The White Stag, Corgi Connection, No Name, Marta Cara, Professor Elm, Kathy Barrickman, Cybard Sands, Steve Hennessy, and Melanie Sanders. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Grupe Horror. As a patron, you get access to bonus videos, content, and a Discord channel. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward. And if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in the next Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you all have a great night.